My name is Melissa Fry, author, editor, and author educator at IndieAuthorLearning.com. Today we're going to talk about all the different types of editing, so hopefully you will learn a lot. Let's get started. There are a lot of different types of editing, and it can be confusing about what type of editing you'll even need for your book. Not to mention all the different types of editing out there and things that you may contact an editor and say, I do this, and you're like, I don't know what that means. This video is going to help you with that. So the first type of editing we're going to talk about is developmental editing. Developmental editing looks at the story as a whole. It looks at character arcs and story arcs and plot holes and continuity and timeline. It looks for all of those things that aren't the technical, maybe what you might think of as editing, as like the technical, is this the right word to use, or is this the right synonym? Do I have the spelling right on this, or is the punctuation correct? It's not that. It's the overall story. So the developmental editing in a novel is going to make sure that they've plugged all those plot holes, that you have continuity between things, you don't change a character's name in the middle, things like that. They're going to be looking for developmental issues in your book. Typically, developmental editing comes before any of the other kinds of editing. And this is because as a developmental editor, or if you're doing developmental editing yourself, you may end up cutting things, changing characters. Sometimes you combine a character or just get rid of one altogether. You may change locations in the book, and that requires a whole lot of rewrites. So because developmental editing can spawn a lot of rewrites, you generally don't want to do any other kind of editing first because it's going to be a waste of time. So get your story arc, your plot, all of that correct first, and then you can move on to the other types of editing. The second type of editing is content editing, or it's also called line editing. Now this is where an editor, or you if you're editing your book, probably both, this is where an editor will take your book and go line by line and edit for things like phrasing and readability and consistency. They do some of the things that a developmental editor might do, but they do it on a more focused perspective. They're looking at a sentence level or at the paragraph level and seeing if things make sense. They might catch developmental things the developmental editor did not happen to catch in their edit, but that's not typically what they're looking for. They're going to change things on a sentence level, like show versus tell. They're going to make sure that there's clarity in your writing, so it's not all jumbled. They're going to make sure that you don't have dangling modifiers and all these other technical terms that probably most of us don't understand. They're going to make sure that you have subject and verb matching and your tense is correct and your point of view is consistent. All of these things they're going to look at on a more technical level. This is the type of editing that I typically do for my clients. This is the type of editing I do on my own book because I enjoy this type of editing. I love it because it helps take a book from in its raw form, and there's always some edits done on it before it gets to this point, but it takes a book that maybe reads a little clunky and it smooths it out and it makes it so much more readable. And it's such a great way to see how a book kind of gets polished and made into a beautiful diamond. The third type of editing is called copy editing. This is probably what you think of when your fourth grade teacher is marking up and saying you need a period here, or you're using too many exclamations, or you should be a double quote instead of a single. In the copy editing process, they're going to catch all the little nitty-gritty details that previous editors may not have found. They might have, but they weren't looking for that specifically. So now this edit is going to look for all of those items specifically. So you're going to want someone who's very strong in grammar and grammar rules. Commas can be a really big headache if you don't know what you're doing. So that's the kind of thing they'll want to make sure that there are rules for where the commas go. So make sure that's correct. Hyphens, dashes, in dashes, all of these punctuation marks that can really make a book look so professional, make it read really well. Again, Some editors previous to this might have caught some of these things, but if you do a copy edit focused on that, you're going to catch a lot more. Now, when I do a content or line edit for a client, I actually do include a copy edit in that. A lot of times you can take the content and line editing and kind of do the copy editing in that same process, because as you're editing for things like show versus tell and readability and pacing, you can also catch if there needs to be a punctuation mark in a certain place. It's just how the process works. Other editors may separate this process out into a different draft, and that's totally fine. When you're looking for an editor, just get familiar with their process and how they do it so that you know they're including all the aspects that you want them to include. The fourth type of editing is called proofreading. This is the final step before the book is done. This is basically all the editing's done, but we're just going to double check. That's what proofreading is. So proofreading is a read through, and there's a very specific way that I like to do this. We'll talk about in just a second. But basically, it's just ensuring that you have caught all of those mistakes and you've really cleaned up the document and made it beautiful. So I do this in a very specific way. Some editors do, I'm sure, have their own process. But for me, I read the book aloud, sometimes under my breath, but still, I'm hearing it. And I read it like a robot. That's just how I describe it. I read every single word, kind of not like I would normally talk, but just like I was saying this way. That way you hear if you're missing words, if things aren't spelled correctly, and I also separate out conjunctions. So instead of saying don't, I say do not as I'm reading it. I don't fix it in the text, but I'm reading it to make sure that I have the right word in there. Because as you know, there can be spelled a whole lot of different ways, and you want to make sure you're using the right one. So if I'm using THEY''re, I would say they are, and if the sentence makes sense as I say they are, then I know I'm using the right one. If it doesn't, I can look at it a little bit more closely and see what spelling it should have been. Okay, so those are the four major types of editing. If you're looking to hire an editor, chances are they're going to be doing one or more of those things. So if you've gone through the self-editing process and you know what it is that you need help with the most, those are the type of editors that you will be looking for. If you struggle with your story arc and you know their plot holes but you can't figure out how to fix them, maybe you want a developmental editor. If you know your story is solid and you've ironed out all those details, but for some reason it still reads a little clunky and you're not sure how to fix it, hire a content editor. And if you've got both of those aspects nailed down, you know it reads well, you know that there's a good story arc and your character arcs are solid, but you just want someone that's a little bit better at grammar than you are to double check the punctuation and spelling and things like that, hire a copy editor. It's pretty simple. And it's always recommended, if you can possibly swing it, to get a proofreader to read your book for you. If you cannot hire this out or you don't have someone willing to do that for you, it's helpful to put your book in a different format. So I've seen authors will send their book to Kindle to do their final proofread, just to read through it, and because sometimes just in a different format can help you see things that you would otherwise miss in maybe your Word document. Another thing authors like to do is to alternate the background. So instead of, if you write with a white background, try to alternate it to a black background with white lettering. Sometimes you'll catch things that you otherwise would have missed. Also, you could change the font completely. Now, I've heard some people use Comic Sans, and that is just cringy to me. So I probably won't be using that one. But if you change the font from what you normally write into something completely different, your brain will trigger it as something different and it will start looking for new things. So you may just catch mistakes that way if you're unable to hire someone to do a proofread for you. So I promised you a bonus. We're going to talk about a few people that you might want to bring into the process of getting your book ready to publish that doesn't necessarily have to do with the editing specifically, but they might be helpful for you. The first one is alpha readers or critique partners. They're usually about the same thing. Now you as the author get to define what that means. For me, once I write the first draft, I send that first draft to a critique partner. They give me feedback. I tell them, hey, this has not really been edited. So if I'm missing a word or something spelled wrong, if you think it's something I might miss later, you can feel free to point it out. But generally, just tell me if my story arc's good, if my characters are good, if this reads well, if I am going off the deep end with this one subplot or something. Just let me know. A second group of people that you can enlist to help, and some people will do this as a paid service, but other authors might do this for you in exchange, and you guys can swap manuscripts. But this is beta readers. So beta readers is typically a critique partner alpha reader. You might only have 1 or 2 of those. Beta readers are usually a wider group of people, depending on the book and the author and your network and all of that. Beta readers give you feedback on your document, similar to what an alpha reader would, but you've done more work on it before it gets to them. So for me, I've gone through a lot of the editing process before I get to the beta readers section. And before I send it to them, usually it's because I send it because I'm stuck, or because I've done a lot of editing, I just need a break from it. I need an outside perspective. And at this point, trust your intuition. If you know that you've just been fighting with this document, you can't figure out what's going on with it, get an outside perspective. Take it with a grain of salt. Sometimes they might give you feedback that just doesn't feel true to you or to the story, and that's fine. You don't have to follow it. But acknowledge their time and be grateful for it, and take what you can out of what they're telling you, because that's why you're enlisting them to help. Another reader that can help in this process is called a sensitivity reader. If there are certain subject matter, some certain topics that you are addressing in your book that could be sensitive for some readers, it's helpful to get a sensitivity reader to give you feedback on if you're handling that issue with the proper amount of care. Typically, sensitivity readers will have some sort of either personal or professional expertise in that subject matter you're writing about. For example, if you write about divorce or domestic abuse, things like that, you might want to have a sensitivity reader, especially if it's not something you are personally familiar with, just so that you're not alienating readers by handling it in an improper way. Okay, so hopefully that was a lot of good content for you. I hope you learned a lot about the different types of editing. The different types of editing too is a process that you will work through in your self-editing process, but it's also something you can hire out after you're done self-editing to help polish your book even further and get a professional's eyes on it. If you're ready to start looking for an editor, I have a 10 questions every author should ask a prospective editor ebook. Title's a little long, but I promise it'll help because it'll walk you through the different questions you should ask an editor, and then it'll give you like the answers that you're going to be looking for in those questions so that you can nail down the right editor for you and one that will do a good job with your book. Because the most heartbreaking thing I see is when someone hires an editor and they don't do the job well. And then they just have to turn around and hire another editor. And it's not a good situation. So you want to do your due diligence as you're looking to hire an editor so that you know and can be confident that you're working with someone that will do your book justice. So I put the link below to that ebook. Okay, so if you like this video, if you found any of the information helpful, give me a thumbs up, like this video. If you have any questions about the editing process, whether it's self-editing or finding an editor, leave a comment below. I would love to chat with you. And do not forget to subscribe to my channel. I do videos on the author life every Friday. Okay, thanks for watching. My name is Melissa Fry. I'm an indie author, book editor, and author educator at indieauthorlearning.com. I'll see you later.